But a personal question, so how has your life changed since the beginning of the full-scale war? How did your work change? How everything changed in these 8 months?
Well, I mean, I can talk for ages about it. I left Russia May last year. In a month and a half after Secret Services conducted a search in my apartment and in the office of iStories. The pretext was a ridiculous criminal case that is still investigated against me. And I actually didn't have an intention to leave Russia, so I went on vacations with one back, with a plan to go back in a month, in June or July. But while I was, actually I went to my, favorite city, Odessa, and I spent some time with my friends in Kiev, and that was the last time when I visited Ukraine actually. So I was planning to go back, but I was talking to my sources. By that time I had a lot of sources in Secret Services and police. I asked my ex-colleagues from Novaya Gazeta to talk to their sources as well. And there was no single source who actually recommended me to go back, and they told me that most likely I would be arrested on the border. And I decided to stay, and it was one of the most difficult decisions in my life because the rest of the team was still in Russia, and I was feeling really uncomfortable, living and working abroad while they were there, and I thought that I made a wrong decision. But when the war started, I suddenly realized that it was probably the right choice. Because while I was abroad, I was able to create an infrastructure and kind of set up, infrastructure to actually meet my colleagues when they had to leave Russia. Because of course, since the first day of the war, we condemned the war. We started writing stories about the atrocities of the Russian army in Ukraine, and of course, all my reporters risked 15 years of prison for just calling this war, let alone conducting in-depth investigations that we currently conduct. And I mean, of course, we're facing lots of challenges and troubles and difficulties, but simultaneously we understand that it's our mission these days to publish stories that are important for the Russian audience. It's our mission because we are Russian journalists, and I think given the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine and started this war, it kind of even brings more responsibilities and more. We're kind of even more mission-driven than we were before, because we feel this responsibility that we gotta act, we gotta do something. And I mean, personally, our challenges, of course, are nothing in comparison with what people in Ukraine suffer and experience every day.
Yeah. So let me get a little bit back then, and coming back to your award-winning investigation into the life of Ekaterina Tikhanova and Kirill Shamalov. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about this? So, and what struck you the most in this case? This tremendous corruption, or the completely lawless world where they live? And also following up on the second part, which you published after the war has started, the full-scale war has started, about Ekaterina Tikhanova and her now partner, Zelensky, which is not related to the president of Ukraine, but is a famous belly dancer. And in this story, at least to me, it was really surprising how they live, how this mindset of a KGB agent works. That even to arrange a date, and in this safest city of Munich, they need 10 security officers. So what did fascinate you in this investigation? Can you maybe also explain a little bit more to our audience?
Well, honestly, nothing surprised me because I've been in this business for 15 years, and I think that the most surprising story for me that I did was 6 years ago when I, published a story about the assassin number one of Russia, the guy who killed more than 100 people, following command from people from Secret Services. That was kind of surprising because this is something that you don't meet that often, and you know, you mostly see in the movies. As for this story, I mean, yeah, I mean, we published investigation about ex-son-in-law of Putin, Kirill Shamanov, December last year. We won the European Press Prize, but simultaneously, when we were working on this story, we realized that there would be some consequences. I remember that I was talking with my editor, ex-editor-in-chief, Dmitry Muratov, and he told me, look, you have like 3 to 4 months, and then they will react. He was right, because we published the story in December. It was quite popular. It was viewed by 3.5 million people, and in 4 months, in April, they came with searches to my apartment. I mean, the story, for those of you who don't know, is very simple. You know, there was a son-in-law. He was married to Katerina Tikhonova, and he earned hundreds of millions of dollars by just reselling shares of one of the biggest petrochemical company in Russia. So his deal was so genius that he bought shares for $100, and then, you know, and the shares were worth $400 million. So that was his kind of business. They were spending this money on luxurious apartments in Russia, in France, and in many other places. Yeah, but I mean, you know, I wasn't that much surprised by the scale of corruption, because this is the family of the president, and we all know how Putin is corrupt.
Can you maybe specify how you got to this information in your report?
Yeah, I mean, that was a, you know, type of story that came from a source. Typically, I would say that the majority of our sources is kind of self-research, something that we find ourselves. This particular story came from a source. It's an anonymous source. We have no idea who's actually behind the leak. Our job was to verify the data. And we spent 1 year actually verifying the data.
So there was a leak
of emails. Yeah, leak of emails that belong to Kirill Shamanov. So our job was to verify whether the data was true.
How did you verify?
I mean, you know, we went to all sorts of public records. I mean, if you see that, you know, say there's a company that sells shares to another company, you go and you check who are the owners of the company. You talk to sources in the company, and you send requests to various agencies. You just do, you know, typical work that journalists are obliged to do.
So, because we are still in the Netherlands, and of course for me also the scale of corruption in Russia is not that breathtaking anymore, but I think for Dutch people still it is breathtaking, and I want you, that's why, to explain and elaborate a little bit more about this. That the guy, in principle, just marrying into the family of Putin, paid $100 for the assets worth 400 million. And it was one of the biggest Seabourg, so one of the biggest companies in Russia. And he got it also through a chain of offshore companies in different offshore states.
Yeah, the guy became the youngest billionaire in Russian Forbes. Very talented person.
Okay, and then they split, right?
Yep.
And the second part of the investigation is basically how Katerina Tikhonova, she got involved with Igor Zelensky in Munich, and then they were arranging their dates. Can you maybe also tell us a little bit more? Because I don't know, we know that the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, he goes to work on a bicycle. He does not need a dozen of bodyguards running behind his bicycle, maybe carrying his suit. But when you arrange a date for a daughter of Putin, it's completely different. So how many Secret Service officers do you need to arrange a date for Putin's daughter?
I mean, it depends on which city and how many days. In this particular case, there were 12.
So 12 Secret Service officers, trained and paid, of course, from the taxes, were running behind love life of Putin's daughter. And what do you think it tells us about the mindset of how can we try to understand the mindset of Putin and the elites? Because can I maybe say that they are afraid of the outside world. It's also this perception of fear and almost a paranoia level, how not safe they feel, even in the safest places on the planet. And what does it tell us also about the perception of the world, and how maybe it also influenced the society in Russia?
I mean, look, you gotta understand that his background is, he comes from secret services. And it means that he treats the rest of the world as a hostile place. In general, he thinks in terms of special operations. I mean, I know this type of people because, I know a couple of people who served with him. I know a couple of people who, who were friends with him, and they have this. It's really interesting because he has this kind of mixture of criminal and secret service mentality. Mentality of a guy who comes from secret services. It's not about fear. It's about feeling that he doesn't trust anybody. I mean, imagine just your life. Imagine that you live a life where you can't trust anybody. It really makes you paranoid. You really think that he really believes that, and he's afraid that someone might poison him. Of course, I mean, when you have such a perception of the world, it creates a lot of. It kind of creates a wrong picture of the world. I think that was one of the reasons why he actually decided to start the war against Ukraine, because I think that when they say about the threat from NATO, from the West, it's not something that they invent, it's something that they believe in. And that is why they don't understand people who think that this is bullshit, because they're like, yeah, I mean, it's so obvious. If you look at his interviews, he's constantly kind of subliming that, the threat was so obvious that I had to react. And it's because of the wrong perception of the world. That's what I, think. And there are many reasons. One of the reasons is that he's kind of soldier of the Cold War, which he lost. And for them, for people from KGB, from secret services, it was quite a serious loss. Even those people who don't support Putin, and I, know a couple of KGB officers who hate Putin, but when he studied the war, they kind of felt that it was the revenge to the West that defeated them in the Cold War. So this is their mentality, and this is why they see the whole world around them as a hostile place.
But for now, in the war, of course it's unsafe for Putin, but before the war, was it objectively unsafe for Putin to go on a bicycle to his work? Like, I know he lives in the Kremlin.
I mean, imagining Putin going on a bicycle to his office is like imagining an alien, somewhere in the center of Moscow. It's like something that doesn't happen. So I can't even imagine this picture,
But objectively seen, like, is it his perception of danger, or is it the real danger? It's like impossible for him to do so.
It doesn't matter because it's a real danger in his inner world. Even if it's it's like with crazy people. It doesn't matter what the reality is. What matters is what they believe in, and the same with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have in principle this KGB agent in the head of state, also with unlimited powers, basically. And of course, he imprints this picture of a world, super unsafe place. And do you think it's also that's why he cracked on independent media so much? He completely cleaned the space for only one perspective possible. So even it doesn't allow interpretations. So it's only one possible view. Do you think it's also connected to this unsafe world?
I don't think so. I think if you look at his career, the very first thing that he did when he became president, he actually cracked down on media, on NTV, because he realized how powerful is media, because media TV made him a president. If you remember this guy, what was his rating before the presidential campaign? Like 3%, and then all of a sudden all the major TV channels started to support him, like the First Channel, and all others. And he realized, and all of a sudden, he became the president. So he realized how important it is to be, what a tool it is. to manipulate people, and that there is a big power behind media. So that is why he cracked down on NTV. Then he went to and he took control over the major TV channels. Then he started to take control over the major newspapers, and now they blocked like I don't know how many. I think more than 1,000 websites after the start of the war. So of course for them it's critically important to create this kind of solid picture of the world that is of course created inside the Kremlin. That has nothing to do with reality. Otherwise, you can't convince hundreds of thousands of people go and die in Ukraine for just for a stupid idea that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and so it's of course very strong topic. Also going back a little bit, during the Corona lockdown, right, Putin separated himself even more from the reality. And maybe some people here in the audience don't know, but Mr. Putin is not a user of internet, so all the information he gets is on such printouts that are delivered to him, so printed and delivered to him by special people. And this is the source of information. And recently there was a really hilarious moment when a schoolboy asked Mr. Putin to subscribe to his YouTube channel. And the reaction of our president was, yeah, I can put my signature, but where? So, what do you want? I will put my signature, no problem, but where? Give me a paper or something like this. So he doesn't know what YouTube is. And I think it also shows us that he's detached from the society, from majority of people which go online, watch YouTube news, watch iStories for their dinner and so on. And do you think it also, this additional lockdown during Corona that limited even more the sources of information, it can also sort of then further deepen this KGB view of the world and push to start the war?
In some sense, yes. You're right that he has isolated himself in the last couple of years. At least that's what sources say. So that his inner circle these days is no more than 5 people, and these are mainly people from secret services. And of course, when you isolate yourself and when you limit sources of information that you analyze, of course it creates a wrong picture. That was actually one of the reasons why they failed with the invasion, because the information was coming mainly from secret services, mainly from one of the major units inside the FSB. That was reporting that we will actually, the plan was to seize Mariupol in 3 days and Kyiv in 5 days. That was the plan. That what people who were entering Ukraine in the first days told us. And the reason why it failed was because they didn't know anything about the modern Ukraine. They still lived in Ukraine before 2014. First of all, because they relied on information from agents that ran away from Ukraine to Russia in 2014, so-called members of Yanukovych's team. And of course, these people are so corrupt, and they were kind of selling false information. As sources from the FSB were telling us, they were selling the air, something that didn't exist. And they were telling, they were kind of writing those special reports saying that Ukrainians are waiting for Russians with flowers, and they hate Zelensky and they hate the power. It was all not true, and because the guy limited himself, isolated himself from the world, and limited the sources that he analyzes, he believed in this completely wrong picture. And it's still going on. I mean, they still live in the world. They still think that they can win the war. Their plan is still to. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but their plan is still to seize Kyiv. You know, it's like they're trying just to win time until next year, but then the plan is still to go on. While everybody is like, you know, if you talk to people from the front line, they are like insane. I mean, they say like it's crazy, it's impossible.
Yeah. So again, do you think it's this KGB agent thinking? Because it sounds to me like he believes only to the sources, only to the agents. So he relies too much on them. Is it, again, some sort of, I'm a secret service and I trust other secret service officers?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's 21st century is really interesting because it looks like it proved that there are some certain skills that we are missing, we as human beings. And one of the skills that we're missing and that we have to develop is actually how we treat information. Because, you know, our cognitive capabilities are still the same as they used to be, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, but the amount of information that we are dealing with is way, way bigger. And it's not difficult not only for Putin, but for all of us, but especially for people like him who are coming from the 20th century, you know, and with this mentality of secret service officer, you know, who sees the whole world as a hostile place. Of course, I mean, it's a big challenge, and you are right. I mean, this is the major problem, the major reason why he decided to start the war, because he had no idea about the real Ukraine and the real Russia.
Yeah, and how do you think how deep is this trench between Putin and Russian society? So how it is their trench, and how deep is it? And also, how much do you think it changed with the mobilization when it was announced? Mm-hmm. So how this was perceived? Because even propaganda, which is super strong in Russia, so even my parents that live there, and they get information from the TV, and it's horrible. And many people still watch TV regularly, but even this was not enough to say that mobilization is good. Even this amount of brainwashing in billions of dollars, of course, well spent, this was not enough to say what they are fighting for. So how is there this trench, and how is it developing right now?
It's difficult to say. So I mean, you know that all the polls show that 70% of Russians support the war. You know that, you know, when we talk to relatives of soldiers, when we talk to soldiers themselves, I mean, we talk a lot to people in Russia, in the regions, and we write a lot about people in the regions, and we have really good sources. We talk a lot to soldiers in the front line, from both sides. And for us, it's kind of obvious that the majority of Russians support the war. It's not I mean, it's something that we have to deal with, and it's true, and, you know, we gotta look straight in the eyes of the truth. Simultaneously, of course, I mean, there's a lot of why, you know, why people support the war. Of course, if for 20 years, you know, you brainwash them with propaganda, and you shut down major independent media outlets, you kill journalists, you make people poor. I mean, of course, there are a lot of whys. But simultaneously, I don't know, I mean, I think that's...
Do you really think they support the war, or support Putin in any policy that he will make?
I mean, there are kind of mixture of reasons. There are some people who don't support the war, but who say, you know, we can't stay home while our brothers or friends are fighting there. Because Russia, especially in the regions, this kind of feeling of man's brotherhood is very important, and especially for those who serve in the army, and they feel obliged to go and fight in the front line if their friends are fighting there, even if they don't believe Putin, and even if they don't support the war. You
I
might want.
thought there was also a high feeling of brotherhood with the Russian people and the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, but it looks like it's not working when you're brainwashed with propaganda and when your leader tells you that you gotta go and fight. I mean, for me, it was impossible to imagine that this war would happen. My family comes from Ukraine. I visited my granny in Donbas region every year. I lived there for 3 months every year. I visit Odessa every year, so I have so many relatives there, and I know that many people in Russia also have relatives there. So yeah, I mean, it was impossible to imagine, but still, it's the fact. And
But how do you think that 70% of the people in Russia, they could also probably not imagine this war happening, but still they support this war?
Well, again, there are a lot of whys, and we can talk for days about those whys. It's still, I mean, for me, I don't understand that these whys are important, especially for those who are gonna study this war, especially for those historians who will describe what was happening to Russia these days. But honestly, these whys are not important for Ukrainians. They don't care why Russians support the war and why Russians invaded Ukraine. They just deal with the fact, and the fact is that that their cities are being destroyed, that hundreds of thousands of people, die, are wounded, and so on and so forth. So we just gotta acknowledge the disease. And yes, there were a lot of reasons why the patient got sick, but he's sick.
What do you think was the effect of your investigations in Russia? Because of course, even then, back then, it was already hard to tell the truth. You said about the Politkovskaya and how everything developed for her, that she was assassinated for just speaking up. So what was your take on your investigations?
You mean what was the input?
Yeah, what was the impact and what did you tell for yourself? Doing important stuff, it's more important than sports? Or like what was your motivation to continue?
Well, first of all, you can, there are a couple of approaches to journalism, and yes, you can think of journalism as a tool to change the world for the best, for the better, but simultaneously, you can think of journalism as a way to actually describe the reality and save it for the future. So I thought that we, these days, as a Russian journalist, we are more as historians than journalists, because our job is to save the truth for future generations. So imagine a history book without stories about who was behind the assassination attempt of Navalny, right? Today we know, thanks to journalists. Imagine a history book without stories about Putin's palace and about the atrocities of the Russian army in Ukraine. It's really impossible to imagine that such a book would exist without these facts. While, thanks to journalists, these facts are known, and hopefully they will help future generations of Russians to actually build a better country.
Yeah, so this was also my follow-up, so to say, question. Do you think that investigative journalism can foster this positive change in Russian society by showing the truth, or not even necessarily the truth, but opening the eyes of public to different sources of information, different points of view, and in principle, actually also showing the truth, showing the logical, consequential reality?
I don't know whether you can open someone's eyes with stories about corruption in Russia, because people say, well, we all know it. So I don't think it's something mind-blowing. And again, propaganda is so powerful that it's sometimes really difficult to crack this wall. But again, I mean, our job is to transform 7-3 proportion to 6-4, and goals gotta be modest because you wanna achieve them.
And Putin, of course, or like the Kremlin, of course, creates difficulties for you to create this goal. Or could you specify like what they did to stop you, and not in the way they searched your house, but also to proclaim you a foreign agent and an enemy of the state? Yeah, no.
Foreign agent, yeah, it's like it's not the biggest problem these days. Yeah, so we until recently were the only media that was simultaneously a foreign agent and an undesirable organization. Recently, Insider joined the team. So, I mean, being a foreign agent is like really nothing these days because we don't even follow this law, you know. So we don't give a shit about it. Being undesirable is way more problematic because by just admitting the fact that I work for iStories and commit a crime, I could be sentenced to 4 years of prison. Because I had the undesirable organization. All my reporters who are cooperating with iStories commit a crime and they can be sentenced to 4 years of prison. Everybody who is reposting our stories can be fined, and then the second time can be sentenced to 4 years of prison as well for just reposting our stories. So that is why when we were proclaimed undesirable, we had to tell our audience, please don't repost us, but subscribe. But can you imagine a journalist who is telling his audience, don't repost us? That's what we had to do. Then when the war started, you know, we kind of, okay, so let's focus on the work, and, you know, everybody understands the risk, and these days we just, you know, we don't care. We don't care. Of course, we're blocked in Russia. Of course, you know, we're undesirable. Of course, we're foreign agents, all of that. But we don't care. We don't treat this state as a legitimate state anymore. For us, it's a gang of war criminals, and this is, I think, the way everybody should treat them.
And nobody in your team was stopped by these measurements.
No one left.
Wow.
And I really admire, you know, my colleagues because, you look, I mean, I've been an investigative reporter for 15 years, so I'm kind of more or less experienced. But I mean, the majority of members of my team are young people, 23, 25 years old. I'm 35, I'm one of the oldest. I'm probably the oldest. Oh no, not the, but one of the oldest. Imagine that these guys, some of them actually don't talk to their parents because their parents support the war. So they had to leave their parents who think that they are traitors. They had to leave their country where the majority of people also think that they are traitors. They came to Europe where, well, they're not welcomed that much because they're Russian citizens and they have to prove all the time that they're, you know, good Russians and that they need visas and so on. And it's humiliating, to be honest, you know, when people have to go and say millions of times, please, sorry that we're Russians, could you please give us a visa? And simultaneously, these guys had to increase the number of stories that we publish 3 times. So they work 3 times harder, despite the fact that the pressure is way, way higher. And I mean, they're really, really real heroes. Not only them, of course, there are many other independent media outlets. I was just, you know, speaking on behalf of my team, but of course there are other media outlets that do amazing work as well.
So we as FreeRussiaNL, we try to support Russian people here. We write petitions and open letters to Dutch government and asking them for some easier visa policies and refugee status for Russian citizens. For example, due to our open letter, Netherlands was the first country to allow Russian conscripts to apply here for asylum in, if I'm not mistaken, in April already, or maybe March. So, what do you think? And then, how can organizations like ours be of help for investigative journalism and also for not only investigations that we can help you to get information or something like this, but also just for Russian society then?
Well, I think that, you know, you already described things that you do, and you just, you know, gotta do what you believe in and what you do. So I think that your job is also important, you know, and have any advice for you because you know your job better than I do. So, how can I advise you what to do since I'm not doing the job?
And was leaving Russia for you, was it easy to get a visa and...
No, of course it wasn't easy, but again, I mean, we got that in the end.
So can you describe this process of how you got into Europe and Russia?
Again, I mean, these are technical things. I had a long-term visa, 1-year visa, so I entered EU. Then we had to, talk to various human rights activists, agencies, MFAs, and try to persuade them that. I mean, it's not like there are. Look, I want to say that there are a lot of people who want to help. There were a lot of people who helped us on our way, and actually, the main story is that we got them in the end, and now we are legalized in Europe, and we can continue our work because it was really. We had to spend a lot of time on these issues, but again, we're not. I don't want to complain because we're not the only ones. And simultaneously, isn't it the biggest problem when you look at what's going on in Ukraine? It's like a small issue that we were dealing with.
Yeah, but it's quite an important thing in influencing the war, and the vision of the war is that independent media can continue their jobs.
Well, in the end, you see that a couple of hundreds of Russian reporters are outside. As far as I know, all of them have visas. So looks like people in Europe understand how important is the job that the Russian media is doing these days. So
I just wanted also closing to the end. So I wanted actually to ask, what can not only organizations like ours, but also Dutch people or people in the European Union do to help you shift from 7 to 3 to 6 to 4?
Support Ukraine. I mean, Russia can be free only if Ukraine wins the war. Russia can change only if Ukraine wins the war, and Putin will never stop if he doesn't lose the war. This is something that people in the Netherlands and all over the world should understand. That I know that in Czech Republic, I don't know about here, but I know that in other
Here
European.
it's quite the same. That people have the vision that if Putin what he wants, then it will be over.
And this is a big mistake, because what this guy desperately needs now is some rest to start from the beginning. And of course Ukraine is not the only goals. Actually the initial plan was to, as I said, to conquer Kyiv in 5 days and then go on to Moldova, and he will never stop. It's just a big mistake. People think that, okay, let's give him those territories that he already controls, and the gas prices will go down. Okay, maybe for half a year, maybe for a year, but then he will start from the beginning. So the only way to stop him is actually to either kill him in Russia or to defeat him.
Okay, I think we're coming to an end. Or did you have a question?
Just one quick question, because do you think if Putin loses the war but does not lose his seat, will it be enough? So I think it will be, of course, enough for Ukraine, but will it be enough for Russia?
No, but it will be the first step. You gotta make the first step, and it will be the first step, and then of course other steps will be needed.
You mentioned a few times this number of 70%, but you didn't mention the other numbers, that number that is reported in most studies, that 91 to 97% of the people actually refuse to participate. And I wonder if there could be bias there, maybe also worth investigation.
Yeah, that was something I also believed in, but then I talked to people from Nevada, and I trust Nevada. They are professional, they're professional people, and they told me they don't see any, that they don't see that during the war, the number of people who refuse to answer is higher, way higher than in normal polls. So they don't see any
extra bias due to fear. Yeah, thanks.
Well, you can't see the impact of your investigations on general public by the number of views on websites or YouTube. Could you also see the impact on, say, policymakers, on people who make important decisions? Mostly I'm talking about people outside Russia.
Did you say that we can't see the impact?
You can see by looking at, well, you can see the impact on the general public by looking at how many people read certain articles.
Oh yeah, so we can see that. Yeah, of course we can. Yeah, of course. So 4 major cases when assets of Russian officials were seized in Europe were taken following our investigations. So this is the Sechin yacht, my favorite yacht, was arrested, and of course it's thanks to our investigation because they knew that actually this yacht belongs to the guy. The villa of Rothenberg in Côte d'Azur in France was arrested following our investigation. What else? Oh, the apartment of Lavrov's unofficial daughter, the daughter of his mistress. She lived in London and her apartment was also arrested. It was also our investigation. And assets of a guy from the Russian Security Council, Komarov, also published an investigation about his assets that he controlled via an offshore company, and these assets were also arrested. So we do see that. And of course, the story that I've mentioned about the Russian soldier who confessed to us to committing war crimes in Ukraine. I know that our evidence became part of the official investigation that the International Criminal Court is conducting in Ukraine, and hopefully it will become part of the future big trial.
So first of all, thank you so much for coming and for your work. I think it's so essential, and I think we all admire it. Something that I'm very curious to hear is on the left in the West, there's quite a widespread belief that the war in Ukraine is partially fault of NATO and Western imperialism. And I'm curious to hear what you, as somebody who does investigative journalism in Russia, would respond to these people.
It's like punching somebody because you believe that this guy had an idea to punch you. And how do you prove that this guy had an idea to punch you? Just because you believe it. And, you know, he does the same. Of course, I mean, he's saying that NATO was kind of approaching Russia. But, I mean, look, Russia was, you know, common border with NATO countries. If you look in that, what is the consequences of the war is like, you know, Finland is planning to have a nuclear weapon on the border, so everything is vice versa. Even if the plan was to kind of hold it, you know, to create a buffer zone, they failed. So I don't think that it's a smart idea that the West, you know, I think that the responsibility of the West is that it didn't properly react in the past. One of the, actually, it was very important points that some sources actually mentioned when we asked them why Putin decided to start the war. They were like, but look, he was always successful. In 2008 in Georgia, everything went well and there was no any proper reaction, you know, and now they control 20% of the Georgian territory. In 2014, everything went well and there was no, I mean, of course there were sanctions, but they were not so kind of devastating, and they were not so bad for the Russian economy. So every time the guy started to work to achieve something, he was successful. And of course, when when he receives these intelligence reports that are saying that Ukrainians are waiting for him with flowers, and when he has this background experience that in the past he was always successful, of course he will start a war. So I think this is the main responsibility of the West, that it didn't react when it was necessary, but not like that they had aggressive plans to invade Russia.